The FBI agents stood frozen outside a small wooden cabin hidden deep in the forests of Montana. Snow covered the ground. The air was silent. Inside that cabin, they believed, was one of the most dangerous criminals in American history. For nearly 20 years, he had mailed bombs across the country. He had killed without warning. He had vanished every time. His name terrified the nation, and now, in April 1996, the hunt was about to end. The agents moved closer. Their weapons were ready. One wrong move could trigger a bomb. The man inside was known for traps. He hated technology. He hated modern life. He believed the world deserved punishment. As the door opened, everyone held their breath. Would he fight? Would he detonate something? Or would he disappear again like he always had? No one knew what would happen next. Years earlier, the terror began quietly. In 1978, a strange package arrived at Northwestern University in Illinois. It looked harmless. When it was opened, it exploded. A police officer was hurt. At first, no one connected it to anything larger. It seemed like a one-time crime, but it was not. More bombs followed. They arrived at universities, airlines, and offices. The bombs were carefully made. They were hidden inside boxes, books, and wooden cases. Each one was different. Each one was deadly. People were injured. Then people started dying. The FBI realized they were facing something new. A serial bomber who left no fingerprints, no clear clues, no pattern that made sense. They gave him a name, Unabomber. It stood for University and Airline Bomber. The Unabomber. For years, fear spread across America. Professors opened mail with shaking hands. Airline workers were warned to watch for strange packages. Ordinary people wondered if the next box could kill them. The bomber never showed his face. He never called. He never explained himself. Until he did. In the mid-1990s, the Unabomber sent a long message to newspapers. It was not a threat. It was a manifesto. Thousands of words long. It talked about technology. It talked about machines. It talked about how modern society was destroying human freedom. He demanded it be published. If it was not, he promised more bombs. The FBI faced a terrible choice: publish the words of a killer or risk more deaths. They chose to publish. When the manifesto appeared in newspapers, millions of people read it. Most were confused, some were angry, but one man felt something else: recognition. Ted Kaczynski was sitting with his wife when he read the words. The ideas sounded familiar, too familiar. The writing style, the anger, the way the sentences were formed. It reminded him of someone he knew very well.
His older brother, Ted Kaczynski, was a former math genius. He had gone to Harvard at a very young age. He had once been seen as brilliant, but he left society. He moved into the wilderness. He lived without electricity, without running water, without contact with the modern world. David felt sick as the thought grew stronger. Could his own brother be the Unabomber? For months, David struggled. Turning in a family member felt impossible, but staying silent felt worse. People were dead. More could die. Finally, he contacted the FBI. The agents listened carefully. They compared Ted's old letters to the manifesto, sentence by sentence, word by word. The match was chilling. The FBI had their suspect. They traced Ted Kaczynski to a tiny cabin near Lincoln, Montana. No phone, no power, no modern tools, just woods, isolation, and hatred. Now, in April 1996, the FBI was ready to move. As the agents surrounded the cabin, everything the country feared led to this moment. Years of bombs, years of death, years of mystery. The door creaked open, and inside they found more than a man. They found bomb parts, detailed plans, journals describing attacks, proof that the Unabomber was real, and he was finally caught. But what the FBI would uncover next inside that cabin would shock them even more, because the truth behind why Ted Kaczynski became the Unabomber was darker than anyone imagined, and it was only the beginning. If you're watching this, don't look away yet. What happened after the arrest would raise serious questions about the human mind, government experiments, and how a genius became a killer. The cabin was silent after the arrest, but what the FBI found inside was louder than any explosion. Wooden shelves lined the walls. On them were jars filled with chemicals, wires, metal pipes, hand-drawn sketches, bomb designs written in neat, careful handwriting. This was not chaos, this was planning. Years of it. Agents searched slowly, afraid to touch anything too quickly. One wrong move could kill them. They discovered journals stacked neatly in boxes. Page after page described bomb attacks in cold detail. Dates, locations, victims. There was no regret written in those pages, only purpose. Ted Kaczynski sat quietly as agents carried the evidence out. He did not shout, he did not cry for a lawyer right away. His face showed no fear. It was as if he had been waiting for this moment. News of the arrest spread fast across America. The Unabomber had a face now. People were shocked to see him. He did not look like a monster. He looked small, thin, ordinary. That made it even more frightening. As Ted was taken into custody, the FBI began building the case. They connected his journals to every known bombing, 16 attacks, 3 people killed, more than 20 injured, careers destroyed, families broken. But the biggest question remained: why?
To understand that, investigators looked into Ted's past. Ted Kaczynski was once seen as a genius. He entered Harvard University at just 16 years old. Professors praised him. Other students feared his intelligence. But Ted was lonely. He struggled to connect with people. He felt different, isolated. While at Harvard, Ted took part in psychological studies. At the time, he did not fully understand what they were. Years later, many would question how these experiments affected him. Ted was pushed, challenged, and mentally stressed. Some believe this was where his deep anger began to grow. After college, Ted became a math professor, but he quit suddenly. He walked away from a successful future. He moved to the wilderness. He believed technology was evil. He believed machines were stealing human freedom. He believed violence was the only way to wake the world up. So he started building bombs. Each bomb was carefully made by hand. He used common materials so they could not be traced. He left almost no evidence behind. That is why the FBI struggled for so long. The Unabomber case became the longest and most expensive investigation in FBI history. Hundreds of agents worked on it. Thousands of leads were followed. Most went nowhere. The bomber seemed invisible. Until the manifesto. That document changed everything. Language experts studied it closely. They noticed unique phrases, unusual spelling choices, repeated sentence patterns. It was like a fingerprint made of words. That is how David Kaczynski knew, and that is how the FBI confirmed it. Ted was charged in federal court. The government prepared for trial, but Ted did not want a normal defense. He did not want lawyers to say he was mentally ill. He wanted to speak. He wanted the world to hear his message. This terrified prosecutors. If Ted went to trial, he could turn the courtroom into a stage. He could spread his ideas again. He could inspire others. The families of the victims feared hearing his voice. Behind the scenes, intense negotiations began. The government offered Ted a deal: life in prison without parole, no trial, no execution. In exchange, he would plead guilty and stay silent. Ted faced a choice: fight in court and risk death, or disappear into prison forever. In January 1998, he chose life. Ted Kaczynski pled guilty to all charges. He was sentenced to life in federal prison without parole. The Unabomber would never walk free again. For the public, it felt like the end. But it was not.
because after the case closed, questions began to surface about the experiments at Harvard, about how warning signs were missed, about how a brilliant young mind became a domestic terrorist. And most chilling of all, people began to ask a dangerous question. Could another Unabomber exist right now, unnoticed, growing angrier by the day? As the prison doors slammed shut behind Ted Kaczynski, America felt relief. But the fear never fully left. Because some crimes do not end with an arrest, they echo. The prison doors closed behind Ted Kaczynski, and the world believed the nightmare was finally over. The Unabomber was locked away, the bombs had stopped, the FBI case files were sealed. But inside federal buildings, another intense moment was beginning. The government feared something new. They worried that Ted Kaczynski's ideas might live on, even if he never spoke again. From his prison cell, Ted was not allowed interviews. His writings were restricted. Officials wanted silence. They wanted the message buried. But it was already too late. The manifesto had been read by millions. Some people hated it, some ignored it, and a small, dangerous group agreed with it. The FBI began quietly tracking threats inspired by the Unabomber. They watched online forums. They monitored letters sent to newspapers. They studied lone individuals who showed the same anger toward technology and government power. Ted was gone, but the mindset remained. Meanwhile, the families of the victims struggled with a different kind of pain. There would be no trial where they could hear answers, no courtroom moment where Ted explained why their loved ones were chosen. For them, the guilty plea felt empty. Justice had a cost, and closure never fully came. David Kaczynski carried his own burden. He had done the right thing. The FBI told him that many times. He had stopped future attacks. He had saved lives. But he had also turned in his brother, a decision that followed him forever. David later worked to support violence victims, trying to bring meaning to the pain. As years passed, journalists and investigators began digging deeper into Ted's past. They wanted to understand how a gifted child became a killer. Attention returned to his time at Harvard, the psychological studies, the isolation, the pressure. Some experts believed these experiences helped shape his extreme thinking. Others warned against blaming experiments alone.
One truth became clear. Ted Kaczynski did not wake up one day as the Unabomber. He was built slowly, by isolation, by obsession, by years of untreated anger, by a belief that violence was justified. The FBI used this case to change how they worked. Behavioral analysis became stronger. Linguistic profiling became more important. The Unabomber investigation proved that words could catch a killer just as surely as fingerprints. It also changed how America viewed domestic terrorism. Before Oklahoma City, before mass shootings became common headlines, the Unabomber showed that one person, acting alone, could terrify a nation for decades. No group, no army, just patience and hatred. Even inside prison, Ted remained dangerous in a different way. He received letters from strangers. Some praised him, some asked for guidance. Officials watched closely. They feared copycats. They feared inspiration. Ted was isolated further, kept under strict control. Years later, when Ted Kaczynski died in prison, the reaction was mixed. Some felt relief, some felt nothing, others felt uneasy. Because his story was never just about bombs. It was about warning signs ignored. It was about how intelligence without connection can turn inward and rot. And it was about how society responds when someone declares war on the modern world. But there is one final part of this story that still troubles investigators. During the search of the cabin, the FBI found writings that were never released to the public.
Notes that showed ideas even darker than the manifesto, thoughts that went further, plans that were never carried out, and that raised a chilling question. If Ted Kaczynski had not been stopped in 1996, how much worse would it have become? Because the arrest did not come from police work alone. It came from a family member's courage. One decision, one letter, one moment where silence was broken. In the next chapter, we will uncover the final truth behind the Unabomber case, what the FBI learned, what America learned, and why this case still matters today more than ever. Because the Unabomber was caught, but the ideas that created him did not disappear. When Ted Kaczynski was locked inside a prison cell for the FBI, the final chapter began with a hard look inward. Agents asked themselves how one man had escaped capture for nearly 20 years, how bombs could travel through the mail again and again, how fear could spread so far with little evidence. The answers were uncomfortable.
The Unabomber case forced the FBI to change forever. Investigators realized that criminals were not always loud or organized. Some were quiet, patient, intelligent. They worked alone. They left behind thoughts instead of fingerprints. After this case, the FBI invested more in behavioral science, psychology, and language analysis. Words became clues. Writing styles became evidence. The mind of the criminal became just as important as the crime itself. Ted Kaczynski was sent to a federal supermax prison, alone, cut off, no interviews, no platform, no chance to spread his ideas again. He would spend the rest of his life there. No parole, no appeal that could free him. For many Americans, that was justice. But for others, the questions never stopped. Was Ted born this way, or was he shaped by his experiences? Could the warning signs have been seen earlier? Could someone like him be stopped before the first bomb was ever built? Experts argued for years. Some pointed to his extreme isolation, others to his rigid thinking, some to the psychological stress he faced as a teenager. There was no single answer, only layers. The families of the victims continued living with the damage left behind. Birthdays passed without loved ones. Careers ended before they began. Scars remained. Life sentences did not heal those wounds, but they stopped new ones from forming. David Kaczynski stayed mostly out of the spotlight. He did not celebrate what he did. He carried it. Quietly. He once said that stopping violence was more important than family loyalty, but the weight of that choice never left him. Years later, Ted Kaczynski died in prison. There were no headlines like before, no fear, no bombs, just a short notice. The man who terrified a nation was gone, but his story stayed. Because the Unabomber case was never only about violence. It was about how anger can grow in silence. It was about how ideas, when left unchecked, can turn deadly. It was about how one person alone can change how an entire country thinks about safety, crime, and responsibility. Today, packages still move through the mail. Technology still grows faster than understanding. Isolation still exists, and somewhere, people still feel ignored, unheard, and angry. That is why the Unabomber story matters. Not because of who Ted Kaczynski was, but because of what he became. The FBI learned that catching criminals is not always about speed. Sometimes it is about patience, about listening, about understanding language, behavior, and motive. And the public learned something too.
That danger does not always look dangerous. Sometimes it looks quiet. Sometimes it looks intelligent. Sometimes it lives deep in the woods, waiting. The Unabomber was caught in 1996 because one person chose truth over silence, because words revealed a killer, because a long hunt finally reached its end. But the warning remains. When anger is ignored, when isolation is allowed to grow, and when violence is justified by belief, the results can shake a nation. This was the end of the Unabomber, but it was also a lesson written in fear, loss, and time. And it is a lesson America can never afford to forget. If this story made you stop and think, that's because it was never meant to be comfortable. The Unabomber case reminds us that danger does not always arrive with noise. Sometimes it grows quietly, hidden behind intelligence, isolation, and belief. One man alone was able to frighten an entire nation for nearly 2 decades, until the truth finally caught up with him. If you want more real stories like this, stories that explain not just what happened, but why it happened, stay with us. The next case may already be closer than anyone realizes.